tātou, e aku rangatira I ngā mana I ngā reo. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou, kei runga ki tēnei rā a tāhua. Greetings to you on this beautiful Hawke's Bay Day. Our karakia is just up there at the back. I excuse those of you who are at that end of the table. And we welcome you to join in with us. We're going to go very slow. You're welcome to turn around and see the words, unless you're a good lip reader. And our karakia. I'll start. Pakataka te hau ki te uru. Pakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta. Kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Cease the winds from the west. Cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land. Let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Thank you, Chair.
Welcome everybody. Just to start off, we'll rattle through items on the agenda 1 through 5, and we've got George and Annie here, arrived bright and early. The first one's here. They come all the way from Auckland, but they're able to get here on time, so that's good. And probably because it's the leading economic region in New Zealand, and all thanks to Hawke's Bay Tourism, obviously. So we will lift Hawke's Bay Tourism report up the batting order from 9, so we'll hear that after items 5, so enable George and Andy to get on with their day. And then we also, James, we've got to change to, we're looking at item 11, is that what you wanted to see?
Yes, please.
After that, so that we've got a whole team of staff ready to roll on that one, so we'll get that out of the way. But we'll start off with the welcome. Are there any notices? No notices.
Mr. Chairman, just one.
Mr. Pucker.
I will have to leave by about 2 o'clock if we haven't finished.
Way by 2, we'll be well finished by 2.
I'm hoping so.
Just to put the pressure on Mr.
Any
Chairman,
other notices?
One.
Walker.
I'll leave at 12.
You're leaving.
Any advance on 12?
I've got 2 apologies,
I'll
one
get my
from
car out of the car park
Councillor Chairman Graham, and one from Mike Moorhead. Are there any other apologies? Can I have a mover to accept those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Seconded, Mr. Paku. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Carried. Conflict of interest declarations. Are there any conflicts to identify for this meeting today? There being none, can we take the minutes of the meeting of the 12th of December? I'm assuming you've all read those. Are there any corrections? No corrections? Move on to the minutes themselves. Can I have a mover for the minutes, please? No one wants to move those. Councillor Bevan, Councillor Wilson. All those in favour of receiving those minutes will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Carried. Matters arising. Are there any matters there that you want to discuss? Well, you'll recall that we had a significant discussion around Hawke's Bay Tourism previously, and we've now got a follow-up from that, so that comes in short order. Any matters there you can raise directly. Three Waters Review. No matters there arising. We'll move on. Follow-ups. Just going to the follow-ups, we've got those on page 3. Hawke's Bay Tourism, we've got that this meeting. Recommendations from the Finance and Audit Risk Committee. The Conservation Estate Report, Conversation and Progress to Audit New Zealand and LINZ. No update on that, Manton? This is on...
It's in progress, but not on today's agenda.
Not on today's agenda, no progress update. Ethical investment, that's no longer being progressed. So we'll move.
Chairman.
Councillor Dickel.
The ethical investment policy item, I can't recall a motion, a resolution of the council not to progress that matter, but am I wrong?
Councillors didn't have a desire, when staff recommended a workshop in terms of developing an ethical investment policy, and that we didn't have support to do so.
So we didn't actually have the current policy stands. Yeah. Our course of action was to hold a workshop. There's insufficient interest in that, so the matter at this point just sits there without a resolution.
We've reverted back to our existing
So
policy.
there's still the
Current policy
possibility or
stands.
probability of a workshop.
If you want one.
Well, I believe it's a matter that should be addressed.
Any other support for him?
I'm against it. I don't want another day's talk fest.
Yeah, I understood that we had dealt with it and come to the
Conclusion.
conclusion that we weren't going to change what was currently in place.
Yeah, policy status quo.
On the advice of Councillor Dick about some things which were, how could you determine the ethics of, for example, alcohol?
Yes.
Should we invest or not? There were several arguments, so we thought we'd just do it on a case-by-case basis as we went.
Do you want to do something, Councillor?
Well, if that is the view of the council, I'll accept that. If it's the view of one councillor, well, I wouldn't necessarily do so.
Perhaps when we have a fund manager come in to present our results and talk to us at our next CNS meeting, we could touch on and revisit the ethical investment policy. Just check in with everybody that we're happy with it as it currently stands.
Or, sorry, Chair, or more to the point, just have the fund manager touch on how their ethical policies have gelled in with our ones,
Sure.
which I think would be more to the point.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. That was the point of the discussion before, that we were going to have a policy discussion on ethical investment policies, when both of the fund managers we'd chosen had policies on ethical fund management.
That's right.
So the question was, why were we going to have an ethical policy on ethics, in addition to what we already had, and how is that going to dovetail into their ethical policies? It was, in my view, a circus.
I think we can capture it as part of an update and just touch on that subject.
Yep.
Are you happy with that, Councillor, just to progress it?
I give up.
Yep, you give up.
I knew apathy would win in the end. It always does.
Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 9, which obviously is the Hawke's Bay Tourism Update, and thank you for the report there. Just before we start...
You've done item 5?
Minor matters.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Minor
Hear
matters.
yourself, Chair.
Is there
Quite
a...
unusual.
Councillor, is there any minor item you'd like to raise, Councillor Barker?
No, I just want to say you're having a shocker, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Barker. Councillor Wilson.
East Coast Farming Expo.
East Coast Farming Expo. Anything else? No? Good to go. Before we start on your report, Annie and George, I just want to welcome Mandy Sharp. Some may know Mandy already, but she's our project lead on tourism, amongst other portfolios. Mandy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. Good morning. I joined Council September last year, so enjoying my time. I'm sitting in the Strategy and Projects team as a project manager, so I'm involved in the project management office and a number of other initiatives in the Strategy and Projects team. Thank you.
The floor is yours, Annie and George.
Kia ora tātou, nei rata mihi, kua hui mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning and thanks very much for the opportunity of presenting again. Annie will take you through just a few brief updates about what's happening in the tourism world, and then we'll get into the substantive issue of the status of the development of some form of regional assistance to tourism, which, as you know, is becoming quite a national debate. I thought it might be helpful just also to comment at the start of the meeting on the status of the tourism industry at the moment, particularly in the international market, because there is quite a bit of commentary going around from Air New Zealand, for example, suggesting, reducing prices, talking about headwinds. Tourism New Zealand have revised their forecast down below MPs to 2.5% growth instead of 5% growth. The point I'd like to make about this is, look, we've been through all this before many times. In fact, in my time in tourism, we've had the Asian crisis, 9/11, SARS, the GFC. And one of the consistent things about that is the industry bounces back quite quickly. There's no doubt that we could hit some problems if China issue a travel advisory and they could halve their tourism overnight. One of the characteristics of Asian markets is they switch on and off very quickly. We're not exposed as a region to China heavily, so it's not going to have a significant impact. If I was sitting in Rotorua, I'd be quite worried if that were to happen. But I think in a general sense, one of the key issues when we go through a tightening of tourism numbers coming in is to maintain the quality of the relationships we have with our international markets. And that's the strongest thing we can do, is to ensure that even though the numbers might be softening, that we're maintaining our interest in maintaining our marketing, because that's the time you actually make ground and you make market share. So that'll be the key message from us. The other thing is, it's probably in a way a good thing. I think you've got the country talking about over-tourism a lot, and that is getting a lot of airplay, and it's probably not really understood that what do people mean by that. It means that some areas aren't coping very well, and we need to be able to develop mechanisms to help them cope, but we're not actually at a crisis point yet. But I think this might take some of that steam out, and people say, oh well, maybe we should be thinking a bit more carefully about it. And I'm certainly hoping that it encourages the people that we've got working on assistance for regional support to actually get on with the job, because I think this is crucial. At the letter I wrote to all of the various local bodies here commented on the fact that this is the time for us all to band together on this and make sure that we've got a unified regional strategy that we can present. So there's a way through this, and I feel pretty confident we're going to get there. There's some good work being started. Annie will talk about the session she's in next week in Wellington. We're at the head table on this, and so we should be, because we want to be leading it. So with those few words, I'll hand over to Annie, and she can talk about a very good January, I think.
Right, next slide. Here we go. Sorry, the formatting's gone a bit skew-iff. But we have had a pretty good January. So despite some of those signs of slowing, January was recorded as our largest ever month for visitor spend in Hawke's Bay. So it was $80 million spent in the month of January, which was up 5% on the previous January. And year-end figures have us at just under $650 million per year. So just that slowing growth, but at 2%. So still a pretty significant figure. January for us, obviously, we had a number of events on over that period. So what we saw was an international lift of about 3.3%, with huge growth out of Australia, which we're delighted with. And the international was up 8.6% and domestic was up 3.3%. So we saw those good Kiwi numbers coming back after last January, and really strong international growth for that month. In terms of visitor nights, where we're at currently is we sit in this sort of just under 4.5 million nights spent in the region each year, but 60% of those people stay with friends and family. So that's a huge part of the mix. Of the paid nights, the commercial nights sit at about 1.2, and actually it's dropped off the bottom of that slide, but the Airbnb nights are about 160,000. So that Airbnb sector, that peer-to-peer sector that you've asked us to work on, is about 160,000 nights of the 4.3 million. Of the paid nights, it's about 12% all up. So it's a smaller number, but it's certainly been growing, and we will expect over this 12-month period probably to see that level off a little bit, just as we've kind of hit about 800 properties in Hawke's Bay who are listing themselves as entire homes available on Airbnb. The other really good piece of news for us was around the website. So as you know, we've spent a lot of time and effort on a regional website, and we've hit 500,000 user sessions just in January. So the site's performing incredibly well. We've got over 450 odd listings from members, so they're all paying to be on the site. And we're in a constant kind of evolving cycle of new content, fresh content, to keep that site fresh and new. So we're delighted with where that's at. We're bucking the trend really on other domestic tourism websites, and that's because we've got a team focused on it, and it's working really well from an engagement point of view. So delighted with that. Just in terms of seasonal, sorry, these numbers, I'll send this out to you, but this is just a little sign of perhaps a little bit of slowing from year to year, but the 3-year growth by season, which is how we originally pitched our strategic plan to the council, was in terms of marketing the seasons. We saw incredible growth, and I'll just read these out because that's gone a bit haywire. So the 3-year growth, so for summer, this is summer 17-18, so not the summer we're in, we don't quite have the figures, but that's 17% up. Autumn was up 16, winter and spring each up 20. In the 12-month period, last summer was down fractionally. Autumn was up just under 5%, winter was up 3.5%, and spring just over 1.5%. So we are starting to see some signs of a little bit of slowing, but overall, over that last 3-year period, we've seen some spectacular growth. Just in terms of the regional visitor strategy, this is a project that we've been trying to get off the ground for quite some time. And the debate around funding tourism, obviously, and it's a big decision it's a big area of how we want to proceed. And obviously, you've asked us to address that. But we do need a proper regional visitor strategy to set a framework to allow us to develop a sustainable funding model and a strategy that encompasses marketing, infrastructure, and event attraction. Hawke's Bay Tourism is very clear about our role. Our role is to get visitors here, doing more and hopefully coming back. But as a region, how do we deliver on that promise? How do we make sure that the infrastructure is correct and so on? So we have, as I think you've seen the letter that George sent to the mayors, we have raised that with them, and we have endorsement from them to move ahead and look at a regional visitor strategy to look at all of these things, and potentially, I think the key thing is how we deliver a regional position. So as George has mentioned, I've been selected to go onto a national group next week to seriously look at how regions could fund tourism, particularly around operating a visitor levy or possibly what might be called a bed tax. Now, every region's in the same boat as us, and from the commentary we've had from international bodies like Airbnb, they're simply not going to apply a solution to Hawke's Bay. They will apply it nationally, but what we're aiming for is that we will have a regional solution, a national solution delivered regionally, implemented regionally, and the money allocated on a regional basis. And that's the position that the other mayors and CEOs have agreed to in principle. Just by way of a very rough example, I know, Councillor Bevan, you've asked me some questions around this, but there are just under 1.4 million paid nights currently in this region. So the question is, how do we manage to get either a percentage or a dollar figure off each of those bed nights? And that's roughly, we could generate over $5 million for that. Now, what we've said to the mayors is that obviously we need to ensure we continue to market the region. It's all very well having and building infrastructure, but if we actually aren't talking about Hawke's Bay, then it's not much good. And so that is kind of imperative. The other piece, though, is, how do we support regional initiatives? We often have councils who, Napier's very much a great supporter of hoping for us to win big events for Maclean Park, but they often don't see lots of other support across the region, but they're regional good events. So this sort of pot of money could be there to assist with that sort of effort. The information provision in this region around eyesights and so on. So there's a number of regional projects attached to tourism that could benefit from this fund, which stops kind of each council trying to have to fund it themselves, and the strategy should inform us about how that works. So the first stage, already we've had agreement from the mayors and CEOs to proceed, and they've agreed to contribute funding and resources, and really the resource piece is critical. We need senior level staff to be involved in this process. We are about to look at the terms of reference, and we'll build that core group of people to meet and consult in the second stage around workshops and consultation, etc. And obviously third stage is a report being developed, presented and signed off. So we believe that the region does need this piece of work, and we hope it acts as a bit of a guide for future funding bids for infrastructure and other things, so that we're actually looking to the future and asking the question, what does the visitor want, what does the visitor need, in line with what the local community can support. So I think that's where we're sitting at this stage. So that's all we've got, because I know you'll have questions, and we've got a follow-up as well to answer as well.
Thanks very much, Annie. That's with George.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillors,
Just give us a rough idea who else is on that working group.
So
Like-
we've got the
Like agencies, not necessarily names.
Yeah, so the chair of TIA, so the Tourism Industry Association, Richard Lauder, a core hotel group, there's Holiday Parks of New Zealand, we have a local government rep from Southland, and my counterpart in Wellington as well. So there's about 7 of us in that working group next week.
And how long do you think it will take?
It's a sprint workshop, so it's a new concept. It's a 5-day lock your way. There's been a huge amount of prep work, but
5-day continue?
Yeah. So there is, for the first time, I would say that there is some urgency at a national level around this issue, and I know sometimes it might think things are taking a while, but this conversation has only really started to happen since September with a change of chairman at TIA, who is from Queenstown, and he wants to see change. And so this is being led. Local Government New Zealand are also stepping in. They're holding a workshop at the end of March. So this is all happening in quite a short time frame. All of the findings of this, we've been told, will be allowed to head into the Productivity Commission report. So it's all tied together, and there's a number of agencies working on it to make sure that it happens.
Just make a comment on that, Councillor, that the reason this didn't happen before is TIA were totally against bed taxes, and they've flipped. They've said it's basically, look, it's inevitable, we've got to do something. But up until now, you couldn't get them anywhere near it. So they're now suddenly, with the change of chairman, they said, look, let's get over this, because something has to happen. And as a consequence, they've put together this, and as Annie says, it's called a sprint, but it's basically a 5-day lock away and come up with an answer. Because it needs to be done, it needs to be done quickly. Because, you know, we're all councillors are facing this same pressure to do something.
Can I just ask a follow-up
Councillor
question on timeframes?
Back to you.
So you're going to have a 5-day lock-up and come out hopefully with an agreed proposal,
Yeah.
which will be drafted into some form of report, presumably, for us, for the government, for whoever. And in an ideal world, what would the implementation of that look like?
Well, as I understand it, any change, if it's a tax, it requires legislative change. So that process, I can't answer how long that might take. We will discuss that next week. I mean, we want this to happen sooner rather than later.
Got a general election coming up
Yeah.
next year, so that's really your drop-dead date.
Yeah.
Got to have it through before then.
Yeah. I mean, the desire from, and we as a region are not under as much pressure as areas like Queenstown and others, and so
You
there's... Well, yes,
you are.
yes, but in a visitor sense. So just from a shared destination management point of view. But there is a desire to get this done, but I can't tell you hand on heart what that will be.
Councillor Bailey and then Councillor Belford.
I just wondered if you've not had any more questions about the funding issue, because mine aren't related.
Sure. Okay. Councillor Belford and then Councillor Barker.
I guess, for Annie and George, what interest in the from the government standpoint is there in this whole endeavor?
It's a good question. I mean, they are, at the moment, they've implemented their international visitor levy, so that's where they see it at this point. I think the pressure's been driven from local government New Zealand, and hoping that the central government will listen I mean, they need to listen to their constituency. So we're hoping that they're positive about it, and it'll be fed into the Productivity Commission. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of next week because I'm not sure how it's going to go.
Samaka.
Two things. I'd have a little more confidence about the 5 days if you weren't allowed out until they had the answer. People seem to be, you can just go in there and sit down your 5 days and then you've got freedom. But more seriously, what I'm really concerned about is another aspect of Tom's question. It's all very well to have a group of people sit there and come up with a solution. What I want to be convinced about is, will it have legs? So, who's going to be in the room that's going to have the ability to speak on behalf of all the rest of the elements that are necessary for this to get over the line? And will they have the credibility to take it that way? So I'm looking for you to describe the nature of the people who are there and the capacity to carry this to the line.
So part of the process is a fairly hefty interview schedule. So 25 additional people have been targeted for formal interviews from central government, local government, council officials from around the country. So it's a fairly extensive list, and I can send it to you. I don't have it on me here. But the whole process is very much involves any entity or association or that is involved in somehow making a decision in this area. So it's a totally new, I haven't been on a sprint workshop before, so I don't know how it works. George has. But the idea is that the pre-data collection is actually enormous, and the interview panel has been selected by all of the people involved. So it's pretty extensive and covers off the right people who need to be there to give their information and their time to the process.
I think just a bit of background, I sense your concern that this is all well and good, but will the government listen? And my sense is that they are now. MB are actively looking at this area. There's a lot of angst within the industry about lack of action in this area. We tried with the last government to get some movement in here, and they really weren't prepared to listen much. That's changed. There is quite a groundswell of concern being raised that the regions, it's all very well for the government to get the tourists here, but the regions are finding it extremely difficult to cope with what's happening, and something needs to be done. So I'd be very surprised if they allow this to be ignored. I'd also be very surprised if it happened quickly, I'd have to say. I think it'll have to get through some process, and there will have to be some legislation. But I can't see the pressure stopping on this issue at all. And it's the best I've seen in a long time that gives me hope that we're actually going to get somewhere this time.
Bill's on a similar vein, then I'll come back to.
Yeah, to stay on this topic, I mean, I think what Annie and the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board would welcome from this discussion this morning is some further, I guess, statement of expectation as to some this might sound like an all eggs in one basket approach here. We're going to betting the farm on a national solution delivered by legislation at some uncertain date in the future. And meanwhile, our council has said there's a clock ticking on addressing a funding issue here in our region for Hawke's Bay tourism. So a prudent investment of energy is being made in trying to advance a national solution here. Do councillors feel that that's sufficient, or that more should be done? Or if more should be done, what thoughts are there as to what that is?
It's a big question, isn't it? Mr. Walker?
Yeah, two questions. One, in terms of your committee that you're going on, is New Zealand Māori tourism involved?
I'm not sure, actually, Toro. I'll have to check on that. I'm not sure that they actually are on that initial sprint workshop. They're being interviewed.
Okay.
I think they're on the interview list.
The other question relates to focus, I suppose. One of the parties that puts a big impact on our region is the motorhome people. And I think they should be, those people who own those motorhomes should be contributing. They take our water, they dump their rubbish here, they clog up our roads, and should be a cost. And they park anywhere they like, it appears, half the time, and some of the councils give them free areas when really they should be going into a camping ground, and someone can get something out of it.
Fair point. Yeah, I agree.
Yes, Barker.
Back to the funding, I'll just say to you that the process you're going through, I think, is a pretty old one. It really seems to me like a variation on choosing a pope. Only they didn't have so many days, just lock people up until they get an answer. But anyway, the spin doctors will make it something to you. But what I'm really interested in is that there has been, George touched on it, but not quite to the depth that there has been resistance to these ideas before. For example, the major accommodation hotels have resisted a bed tax. Fought, argued, rowed, scrapped. And you're now in an environment where tax is a sensitive issue. I don't know if you're reading the papers or not lately. So you're entering into a period where tax is a highly sensitive issue, and you're proposing to introduce a new tax with a whole group of people who have opposed it previously. And I want to hear from you about how these elements are being taken into account. I haven't got a sense of this, so I'm trying to get a sense of, are you going to go and have a meeting here with a willing, and then come out and have the same old chorus of dissent from the major accommodation hotels, etc., later? So,
the issue for hotels was, and always has been, that look, this is unfair. You're taxing one part of the tourism industry because it's easier.
True. We always do that.
What's transpired as that discussion's gone on is everybody said, yes, it is easier, and perhaps we have to get over it. And that's been the change, because there was resistance. But when you talk to hoteliers now, there's a sense of inevitability that they can't hold this thing up, because there's no other easy way of catching the money, unless you come up with some sort of, I don't know, entirely innovative solution. Most countries use bed tax as a way of collecting funds. So if it's your intention to tax the tourist for funding infrastructure and marketing, the bed tax seems to be the most efficient way to do it anyway. And there'll be, look, people will argue against it, but generally speaking, there's an acceptance within the industry that this is probably going to happen along those lines. And that's why we've seen Tourism Industry Association flip on it completely and say, right, this is probably going to happen, let's get behind it and let's see if we can get a solution, because it's reaching a critical point. So look, I accept your concern, but I think we may well get there this time.
I'll come back to you shortly, Councillor, if you don't mind. I just want to follow up, because Tom has made an important point. Essentially, what is the steer from this council to you around both locally, Hawke's Bay Tourism progressing our request around funding, and does that go on hold, and do we rely on the national effort to resolve this? Can I come back though to the proposed regional strategy? And George, you mentioned this, the hotel industry is the easy beats around this. Similarly, this regional council is the easy beats locally in terms of funding. Can I ask around regional strategy, does it include a conversation with our leaders in the region to co-fund Hawke's Bay tourism? Are we talking to Napier and Hastings mainly around a co-contribution towards Hawke's Bay tourism as a part of that strategy?
I think, that needs to be determined within the strategy as to how we fund. The strategy needs to come up with the solution on a funding framework. And I note, the comments around what do the other councils contribute. Well, they don't contribute to marketing because that's our job. They're investing in infrastructure and eyesight provision and all those sorts of things that we don't have to cover the cost of. So I think that's I think, where we should have it sit. Ideally, if we get a funding model right, there will be more than enough money to fund all of these things. And but again, the collection of that money needs to be determined, because the easiest way to collect it is regionally. So you know, rather than if we start to carve that up back to TLAs, you know, it just makes it a hell of a lot more complicated. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done before we get to that outcome. But I would say that you know, we need a singular approach to this, a regional collection of funds, and then maybe there's a different structure in terms of how that money is allocated, i.e. who determines that? Is it a representative from each council, or how? I'm not sure. But that's what the strategy should unlock, is the best framework for funding the region.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but we have the same issue with civil defence, the same issue with coastal environment funding. We get back to that the scenario. Regional council is the easy beat. Go to them for funding.
Could I just make a comment on that, Chairman, that I suppose this is a be careful comment. After some years, we are in the fortunate position that people allow the region to be marketed regionally. They didn't do that when I started here. We fought with everybody who wanted their own place. You don't want to go back to that. And one of the problems with doing that is people say, well, we're going to fund marketing. Where's our bit in it? And then we get back to this fractured marketing that was going on. The way I would see it is the current model, where the regional council is responsible for regional marketing and local councils are responsible for the infrastructure that supports tourism, is a very good model. Now, I think that funding model can take the heat off the regional council's coffers, but don't give up the responsibility for it, because it will just fragment, and next minute we'll have all of the stuff that we had going on before, which was a nightmare, and the region was going nowhere. So at the moment we've even got a regional website, which was just unheard of. So you've made progress in this space. Hold on to the leadership of the brand for Hawke's Bay to yourself, but allow the local bodies to do the infrastructure and develop. And also that infrastructure needs to develop in a way which is complementary to one another, so we don't get a splash planet in Napier and they build a aquarium in Hastings, if you know what I mean. So that's the real argument that needs to happen here. But for me, the goal would be enough money comes out of this thing for the regional council to fund Hawke's Bay tourism without imposition on ratepayers. But I'd hold on to the leadership, that's all.
So just to hopefully bring this funding thing to perhaps a close, Auckland have taken the bull by the horns and have put on what is essentially a bed tax, is that right? Can you give us...
Well, it's a rate change.
Yeah, it's a rate differential, whatever that is. I mean, in theory, the regional council could go out in this coming up annual plan and do just that, consult on it and do it. Potentially, I'm just interested in how successful it's been. Has the judicial pushback won or lost, or is it died a natural death and they've just sucked it up and getting on with it?
Well, it's the problem with they didn't really listen to the industry around it, so they only targeted hotels and initially Airbnb properties, and it was a tax to landlords. And so, as a visitor, you don't see it on your bill. It's not line item out, but what's happened is they had this great claim that they were going to, target 12,000 Airbnb operators, and they've managed to find about 1,300 because there's privacy laws attached to this scenario. So instead of actually working with Airbnb and coming up with a better solution, they've kind of not done the right thing, and now it's in court. So what's also happened in some areas, you've now got no Airbnbs because they can't be bothered, and in some of those areas there's no other alternative for people to stay, and that would, if we did something like that, well, places like CHB and Warrell would probably suffer because Airbnb provides a service that in lots of cases we don't have. So it's not the model that anybody wants to adopt from a regional point of view.
The other thing, the Airbnb are happy to take a percentage and pay it on, but nationally. So if the decision is to take 10% off the top or whatever, 5% of the booking fee, Airbnb will do it for you. And if you could get that through all of the booking agencies, then you've saved a hell of a lot of administration. But it has to, their argument is, we can't do it locally, we've got to do it nationally.
All or nothing.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty good
Thank you,
offer.
Chair. Councillor Beale.
Can you just clarify for me, because there's been quite a bit of discussion about Airbnb, and Airbnb themselves have publicly said that they would support this as an initiative to support tourism. Are they representative of the group of online?
They are they're
Because
the
there's also-
largest.
I know they're the largest, but there's also Book a Batch, and there's, I don't know, there's probably 4 or 5 national ones. Are we talking to all of them
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah, no, we are. But they're the easiest one to start with.
Yep.
But yeah.
Once one goes, they'll all have to.
So what is the process, though, for resolving that in terms of who instructs Airbnb and the others at the end of the day? These are the rules of the road in New Zealand.
Would be MB,
Or-
I think.
Who?
Be MB. Ministry of Business and Innovation, that would be their role to
Which
put
is a
in the...
different decision than this broader universal bed tax issue. Is it
No, it
not?
would be part of it.
I think
Be part of
Part of it.
it'd be an enabling legislation.
No one's going to do it voluntarily.
Mr. Palmer's got a question, and then
So we've just been through our rates collection round for the current financial year, and in that we shifted the differential for the collection of the rate part of the journey back towards flipping to 70-30 rather than 30-70 in terms of the commercials. Have you had any feedback from the sector from this most recent shift at all?
Not yet. No.
Are they paying it yet?
They would have paid it.
They've started to.
Yes. That would have started in July, no?
So the demand went out last October, and then it was collected by the end of January. So just interested to know whether there's been any reaction to that.
None at all.
It's gone to 50-50, so obviously the commercial operators have seen an increase in their contribution to the economic development rate. That might have been moderated somewhat by the reduction in the overall collection. So we'll probably see next year that more intensively when we go to 70-30.
well, we've covered a fair bit of territory. Councillor Bailey, is that a move, or are you...
No, I've got some questions, Chair,
Questions,
which
okay.
are unrelated to the funding.
Okay,
stuff.
sorry,
Yeah,
yes, you did too.
Thank you. Just a comment, Mandy, through you, Chair. The title in your paper, HB Tourism Update, I was actually looking for some other things in there which we had passed in the long-term plan, which you hadn't. It was clearly, reading through it's clearly a paper about an update on funding sources, and that would have been nice to have been made clear in the title. It's also just for future reference.
You noted.
You've got on page 45, you've distributed the tourism industry, the survey asking about information about living wage. When are you expecting to get the results back on that?
So I've got some interim results if you'd like me to share them, but it's still would quite like a broader group of people to fill it in. But at the moment, we've got the answer we have is that about just 36% are paying the living wage, with 8 intending to, 23% can't afford to. And then the other comment, the rest of the group, the comments were that we pay more than the living wage, we pay some of our staff the living wage, and the other comment was we pay according to the realities of living costs, i.e. We employ staff, a lot of high school students, etc. They live at home, they don't have burdens and liabilities, therefore they don't hit the living wage yet. That's the comment, the general kind of flavour of commentary that's come through. And yes, we paid a full-time staff, but not part-time staff. So they're just some of the initial comments I've had, and I'm happy to share that full report with you when it's completed.
Absolutely, that
Yep.
would be marvellous, thanks. Which brings me, can you go back to your slide a bit on the regional visitor strategy?
Oh,
Oop.
this one? No, this one.
Yeah, one of the comments I've been some of the feedback I've been getting from the community in Napier is around. There's almost a feeling like just to quote one which I thought was quite fascinating. They felt like an exhibit in a zoo. and this is about the growth of the tourism industry in Hawke's Bay and just the number of people that get dumped in town, especially during with the cruise ships. So I'm wondering whereabouts, I mean, it may not be with Hawke's Bay Tourism, it may be with Matariki or whatever, where there is a discussion held around when does tourism reach the saturation point in terms of their social licence to operate in town or in the region. Because we must reach a point somewhere where the people who actually reside here in Hawke's Bay, or especially in Napier, because they're the ones I talk to, that social licence starts to dissipate, and that to me would be a bit of a concern. So, like I say, I don't quite know where that conversation could be held, but if it was a sort of one of the items that was considered when we're having these strategic discussions, it would be really helpful.
Absolutely. No, it will be included in the terms of reference.
All right, I think we need to move on reasonably quickly. Councillor Wilson, was that a move? And Councillor Belford will no doubt second that. Any comment, Councillor?
Oh, the usual thank you to George for extracting himself from Courtney Place for a day. And the flavour you're getting, you sort of gave us a bit of a touch at the beginning, but this incredible growth we've had over recent years is possibly going to be tempered somewhat with the range of things that are going on around us and outside our control. So, as long as we can still get our market share and fight for that, that's why you're here. So, thank you.
Yeah, I would just comment, we're getting to the end of year one of a 3-year commitment on our funding. I don't detect any extreme angst around the table that Hawke's Bay Tourism should be doing more or different than they are doing in terms of addressing the funding issue. In year two, I think we'll start to feel the pressure a bit more on this point. We'll have some sense of whether the broader strategy is going to gain any traction or not. So I guess unless someone in their comments corrects me, I'm going to, I think what we're leaving on the table is full speed ahead on the national level and attention to some of the other non-funding issues that have been raised in the previous discussion, but that at least as far as the funding is concerned, we don't have any other expectations of Hawke's Bay Tourism than to do what they're doing. Is that?
Right.
So, in other words, not a lot of grumbling, 2 or 3 meetings down the road here. If Andy comes back and says, sorry, our 5-day workshop was a total failure and went nowhere, it's going nowhere, et cetera, et cetera. This was your opportunity to re-steer the effort.
Councillor Market.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to both of you for the report. It's much better than I thought it was going to be. When I read this, I thought this is a classic case of out of yes minister. Move the discussion somewhere else, away off here, have a discussion, do something else about it, and then hope that people forget about, oh, Minister, well, it's lucky you raised that because we've had a report from the committee. So I thought this was a bit of a ploy to shift it off somewhere here. I was a bit cynical about this, but you've convinced me that this is a serious crunchy move. And the other thing that you've told me, which I didn't have out of this report, is these things happen not because of the hard stuff, but because of the soft stuff. That's about people's attitudes and intent. And that's what this report didn't have. And if you have, as you have outlined, that the inclination of people has shifted dramatically, 180 degrees, from being against something to being in favour of, and if we have an industry consensus and a consensus with local government and so on, this will make the ground easier for central government to move. It's not going to move on these areas if there's going to meet stiff resistance. It's not going to buy another fight. So that's what I was worried about here. But you've said, no, the industry supported this, local government is, so it's smoothing out the ground. So from your report today, I'm quite optimistic that we've got good grounds to move forward here. But we haven't had that for a long, long time, never. So this is a remarkable presentation. I want to thank you for it. So it's vastly better than it reads. So it doesn't always happen that way, and I'm really grateful for it.
As a fan of Yes Minister, I didn't think we were that good. Councillor Dick.
Oh, my comment is thank you. You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you for getting that survey done. I really am looking forward to those results. And I'm with Councillor Barker on this one. When I looked at it, I thought, oh, nah, it's going down the rabbit hole. The funding debate in terms of getting central government involved. But I was really, really encouraged by the comments that the industry itself is saying, hey, hang on a minute, we've got to change the way we're thinking things. And that's a really positive step, I think, which is going to bode well for the future of the rate take from the ratepayers of Hawke's Bay. Thank you.
Mr. Waka.
Just one point in terms of the living wage, you know, in terms of someone who's in the industry, it is hard in the winter. So, you know, don't get too hard on the people in there, because some of these winter months it can be not a lot of revenue coming in.
Just a comment before handing back to Councillor Wilson. Firstly, we are in midsummer, and we've had some wonderful results for the region, and that's something to celebrate and be happy about. Not looking over the horizon at any storm clouds, but taking it as it comes, and we are doing well, and Hawke's Bay Tourism can be pleased that they're a significant contributor to significant regional growth and development. So that's a really good thing. I think what was important coming out of this discussion was what is the council's read and or direction of travel, given we've given you a pretty solid steer down a particular road. You've probably heard some words that say let's park our efforts locally and focus on the national scene. I disagree with my colleagues on that. I'm suggesting that we pursue both, that we, as part of the regional development strategy, despite your words, George, I think we still need to have that conversation with our local authority counterparts. We also need to be pursuing the industry more and having that conversation, not only for revenue in the door, but skin in the game. If, for example, the Airbnb sector is participating, is fronting up some money, they will form part of a dynamic regional tourism. Leaving them to do their own thing on their own, you get just that. So my advice, and I'll be interested to see the paper coming back. This is a committee, goes to council next council meeting. As for Ms Sharp, to actually put some of these issues so that we can, as a council, in second debate, consider what our direction of travel is. So in a couple of weeks' time, we are to tell Tom to take to you the council's final position on this. So I just make those words in passing as to our next debate on this. Councillor Wilson.
Nothing there. Yeah.
We've had a mover and a seconder that the report be received. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. It's carried.
What about abstentions?
Was there an abstention,
I
Councillor?
don't know, just want to check.
It's a provocative move from me. So thank you, George and Annie. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Annie does 2/3 of the job. Thanks, George. Thanks, Annie. You are.
Committee, we've just missed a slight misstep in regard to the follow-up items. I didn't get a remover and a seconder. Councillor Barker, I'm sure,
I want to exercise my right to speak and say I confirm my earlier advice. You're still having a shot.
As me, Brian Dorset.
I'll take that as read. That all those in favour of receiving those will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Carried. Now we'll move to agenda item 11.
11.
James.
Is that the one?
Yes, at the start.
Organisational
Oh,
performance
you-
report.
No, was it? I thought it might have been.
Thank you, Chair. Look, we have provided for you today the first edition of what will be a continuing series of organisational reports on a monthly basis. This wraps up the first 7 months of the 2018-19 year, so has probably a little bit more narrative in it than we might expect to come through to you on a monthly basis. It contains content which has typically come to the Council in different forms in terms of a human resources report, which has been a regular report to Council, the risk management reporting, and the activity reporting that occurs on a monthly basis at the back end of Council meetings. We haven't included all the activity narrative that you will get when this first comes to you at the Council meeting. The intention is to provide you with a one-stop shop in terms of a statement of where the organisation is at month to month and a summary of the activity. This is very much a work in progress, and we've got to strike the right balance between providing you with too much information but yet enough information for you to get a good overall picture of where the organisation is at. Format-wise, the document is not symmetrical, so there are a range of different data sources from across the organisation that have been pulled together, so we've got some work to do to tidy that up. We're seeking today your feedback on both the content and the formatting of the document. We have included some new things such as the media log, so you can see all of the media inquiries that have come in, and in this case it's since the beginning of the year, so it's not the full 7 months, as we've only started collecting those media inquiries in a consistent way this financial year. So one of the things that we've yet to do effectively is pull together a set of lead indicators for the organisation's performance, and we intend to build those into a dashboard that on a A3 sheet of paper that on a monthly basis you can see a series of agreed indicators that give you a sense of how the organisation's performing in both a financial and non-financial sense. So what we're really trying to do is ensure that you can more effectively do your job on a monthly basis, and what I'd like to do is see the monthly report be at the front of the agenda for the monthly council meetings, not simply the activity report, which typically is the last item of a council meeting. We whiz through it, we have a few quick questions about a few areas of interest. I think it's important that the council on a monthly basis during its council meetings has a discussion with the executive of the organisation about how the overall organisation has performed during that month and how we're tracking against many of the indicators that we've set for ourselves on an annual and a triennial basis. So bear with us as we develop this document up into something which is user-friendly, but today is our starter for 10, and we welcome the feedback on that so we can further refine it.
Yep. James, you've assembled quite a crew. What's your objective in terms of how we progress this?
So look, one of the things that struck me last week at the council meeting is there were a whole series of questions, as there often are at the end of the council meeting, in relation to the activity report, and I'm not in a position to answer questions about the operational aspects of the organisation. So if we can have this as a standing item at a council meeting at a regular time that doesn't therefore involve people from right across the organisation to sit right through a council meeting waiting for that item to come up, it will ensure that we have the appropriate people assembled to answer your questions across the operational span of the organisation. So we've got most of the business groups represented in some form today, so we should be able to answer any questions from the report.
Yeah, so clearly this is a core activity of this committee and of council, and so I'm very pleased to see the format there. I'll come back to you, Mr. Walker. Joe, are you the leader of this?
It sits with my business group, yes.
Okay, in terms of, so you'll lead
Point
that
it
process,
together.
James?
Yeah.
So councillors, I hope you've had a good chance, committee members, a good chance to read the document. I found, for example, page 33 or 99, whichever you choose, that sort of very brief summary excellent, so thank you for that. But many other strong features of a report in here. So before we open it up, are there any comments on the, if you like, the style and approach that is adopted here? James, in terms of assembling the crew for this, perhaps if we do put this as the first agenda item of the committee each time this is raised, so it's dealt with as the lead item for corporate and strategic, if there's any support
And
for
if
it.
that were done, would that replace then the full council discussion that has occurred at the end of the meeting of, so that would no longer be on the agenda of the full council?
So there's two questions in this. The first of which the chair alluded to is the status of this reporting vis-a-vis the corporate and strategic committee relative to monthly council meetings. So we one option is that we do a slimmed down version for the monthly council meeting, and then for corporate and strategic we could have a deeper dive into those matters that are particular to corporate and strategic, such as in the financial and human resources and corporate services areas. So that's one possibility, and that's I guess more of a timing question. In terms of Councillor Balfour's very specific question, what we would do is we would collapse that activity report into this document and seek to get a streamlined picture on a monthly basis of the organisational activity.
But this is a committee that meets 6 times a year, not 12, so
Correct.
you only need to do this 6 times?
That
It seems to be overkill.
Well, that's something we'd like some guidance on, is whether monthly is too excessive in terms of your desire to track organisational performance. It could be that it's a function of the CNS committee only, but look, it's quite a long period between CNS meetings sometimes, so it's something for your feedback on.
Councillor Devon.
Just in light of the discussion I had with you earlier today about the onerous reporting requirements that our staff have, I'd be very happy if this was done just 2 monthly at CNR meetings. I think that's adequate. Yes, we're going to get it 6 times a year. It's quite comprehensive, and I think that would suffice for our purposes.
Now come back to you.
Sorry, can I just correct? The CNS is a quarterly committee.
It'll be 4 times a year.
So it's
4 times a year.
4 times. So whether quarterly is sufficient is something we need a view on.
Councillor.
Mr. Chairman, you're not suggesting that it replaces the monthly activity report to council?
I'm suggesting that we will collapse the two into it, and so you get a consolidated view on a monthly basis. Look, the executive of the organisation needs on a monthly basis to track our financials. We want to track obviously what's happening in our HR area. It would be useful probably on a monthly basis for you to get the media inquiries that have come in the month, the Lagoima requests. So there are some things that you may want to see monthly, or you may not. This is really the question. We will be collecting most of this data, and once this is established template, actually populating it won't be so onerous. But if it's more than you need, then we won't burden you with it.
It builds on the activity report, but I wouldn't like to see it replacing it.
Yep.
And to be honest, I think it's too detailed, it's too voluminous, it's too hard to read.
To receive.
Takes too much time to read, and we're not here to micromanage. That's your job.
Yep.
Councillor Hewitt, and I'll come back to you.
James, this was really interesting. You're getting into some of the governance side of things when we're tracking down of things like sick leave days. So that's interesting. I think the huge weakness here, and it has been for a very long time, is the works group, the monitoring of that. So I'm sorry that's not at the forefront of getting things done. But in terms of, so this is good for our due diligence on the organisational performance. But in terms of the monthly reporting that we see, it's really helpful to see a snapshot of what's coming up in the region, so you have the opportunity to be included as councillors. So I would see that more as, I mean, and I noticed the chairman's stopped doing his chairman's report of what's coming up as well, but it is helpful to see. So you're in the loop, you know, when staff are in your regional activities going on.
So for the monthly report, a forward-looking section is certainly helpful, I think, to all of us. So I think that is something we can bring through. The works group activities were, as it notes in the paper, are intended for this going forward. Things like sick leave have been reported to council on a 6-monthly basis up until now, and so you are getting visibility of those sort of metrics. Obviously there's not a huge amount changing month to month, but what I would envisage is on your dashboard there's simply an indicator which is showing whether it's trending up or down, and you know, it doesn't necessarily warrant a significant discussion on a monthly basis. This document for me was too narrative heavy, it was too text heavy and too light on those sort of key metric indicators. Just more of those headline indicators I think would be more useful for a very quick conversation about, are we tracking, are we seeing any trends, as opposed to you having to read an awful lot of narrative. But this is a classic case of it takes twice as long to write half as much.
Councillor Barker?
Well, I'm in Councillor Bevan's camp on this. I prefer to have a very thorough going over of something less frequently than a shallow going over of things frequently. I just think it's better. And the idea of having a detailed report like this once a quarter, we go to the lot, I would welcome. We ask all the questions. No, it's going to be a big day, we're going to have lots of questions, go over it, and then we've done that, it just simply goes up a report to council and be approved. This is the time we have the discussion. And we go through the organisation with some detail. Yes, I want to see the sick leave, because that's a litmus test for what's going on in the organisation. There's a whole pile of other things that we want to see. There's lots of stuff in here, and I didn't mind reading it all. I quite enjoyed it. I'd like more narrative. If you want to give me a report on what the organisation is about, I welcome it. I'd like to see the chart on air travel, etc. There's a whole pile of things I'd like to see on here that we haven't seen. Happy to dive through the details. So I really like this for a start. I've got a gazillion questions. And I just like, I don't know whether someone's a bit of a humorist in here, but before I get chopped off, I like to say that on page 91, we've got amber, no charge, state of environmental monitoring, diatoms look to be caching in at Wakapiro and lurking cyanobacteria. Well, I want to know about those. I want about those that are up front and personal about it, not the ones that are lurking. So I just thought the person's written this has got a bit of humour. I thought it was a well done report. There's lots of bits in here.
I thought that was a Hawke's Bay Today front page headline.
Lurking.
I think
Lurking cyanobacteria.
Dr. Hicks will have drafted that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate James and his team, of course. I've been looking for something like this for a long time in terms of how we do our business, in terms of the measurements, so that we can see have we got the right focus, are we doing the right things, are we spending our money on the right things, and I like performance measures, and the other thing I would like to see is some consistency, like Hawke's Bay Tourism, who just left. I don't know what their performance measures are in terms of us. And I'm not sure whether they've got the right focus. I don't want to be disruptive while they're here, and I'm not too sure whether they can take credit for half of the stuff that they are taking credit for. And there are also lots of duplication, like visitor information centres. They do a lot of marketing too. So it would be good to see, in terms of Hawke's Bay Tourism, some performance measures. The other thing is, in terms of consistency, it would be good to see some performance measures in terms of how we deal with tangata whenua.
Yep. Fair enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll quickly finish this segment off and then get into the report. But Councillor Belford, you had a comment?
Yeah, I guess I'd be happy to see this on a quarterly basis, but not more frequently. And I'd like to see it organized in a way that drew our attention to the questionable areas. I mean, the underperforming areas, so that at a glance we might have whatever our discussion generated by this report gets focused in clearly on things that you feel we should be worrying about. We can be at our own discretion to find other things to worry about. But rather than throwing it all out there equally, it does seem to me that from a governance standpoint, something like this should be pointing us to areas that we ought to be worrying about or addressing as a group.
Right, I think there's a reasonable across the board consensus that we look at probably quarterly, and just taking on your point about overburden of reporting, and then continue the monthly sort of major feature.
Slim down.
So the activity report, do you want to see financials on a monthly basis as an example, or are you happy tracking those quarterly?
I want to come back to something later on about the delegations. There's some things here I'd like to raise about that. But before we go, could I just make a suggestion here about how we handle this? Because I've got a gazillion questions I can ask on this report. Lots of things I'd like to know. We turn up here and we ask questions, and it's sort of like a free flow thing. Yeah, people sometimes call on the bounce. But I was wondering, could we have like you get when you're in these trendy university places, an open dialogue conversation, but within the council, where on a report like this, you get the report sent out in advance, and you can then send in the email to whoever it is what your question is about things, and every councillor around the table is in the loop, so they can go and see the questions and the answers they go through, and sort of have an open conversation, a chat room sort of thing. So we when we get to the meeting, we're a bit better informed, and we've seen what everybody else's questions are. I might have some others. So and say to put that on Mondays, have to be in by Monday 5 p.m. And could we do something like that?
I think that's completely doable, so we could give that a trial and see how it goes. Look, if for those of you that are working off your electronic agendas, I guess it's relatively straightforward as you're reading through the agenda to throw questions in an electronic form as you go through. So rather than necessarily having to hold those for the meeting, as you think of them, fire them through, and then we can provide a preliminary response or a full response, and it certainly helps with us ensuring that you've got the right people and the right information available on the day.
That's what I thought, and I think it would just be a better conversation, wouldn't it?
Agreed.
Okay, I think we've given a reasonable steer on the construct.
Mr. Chairman, James asked the question, do we want financials in the activity report? Headline, yes. And that should probably only take 6 lines.
What we might try to do is bring together something that's very, very brief on that monthly basis that fleshes out the activity report, so it's not just narrative. You've also got some metrics as well. But we'll see. Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I concur with your quarterly reporting thing. Just comments on that, Chair. But through you, one of the things I'd like to see fleshed out in the report when it comes through us every quarter is the performance of the enforcement and regulation team. I think what they've got on there at the moment is pretty low in detail, especially the performance measure around pollution calls, and I think it's important that we don't just put a number in there. I think we need to actually have a breakdown of what they were, a list of them, like we do, for example, we're doing for the media or for the other things.
Agree with that point, Councillor, and it was a question that was raised as in the preparation of this, and we've just got a little bit of work to do to start collecting that data in finer detail without manually having to go back through each pollution response and categorise, if you like. So at the moment we're collecting the numbers in terms of pollution responses and then a detailed narrative in relation to each incident. What we're not necessarily doing is putting them into a bunch of categories such as spill to water or an odour complaint or whatever it is. And
I was thinking more along the lines of, you've got 700 calls in there.
Yep.
Last year 200 of those would have been about tomato mushrooms.
Yes.
Right. So it's really one incident which has generated a hell of a lot of response.
Yes.
So to me that would be more interesting than saying which ones are purely about water and which ones are about.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Just so turning to the report itself, you had a zillion questions, Councillor.
I just
Are
got.
there any others?
Do you want people to go through and identify their questions, or go through page by page and questions on it? How do you want to do this, Chair?
Well,
Are you prepared to take guidance on this?
well, let
continue to
the
have
questions
shocker.
flow, but if you can reduce it down to a zillion less 3, that would be good.
Well, Chair, can I suggest that we have a particular staff member comes at the front to answer questions, and then we go through that staff member's questions, and then
Let's try the first question then and see how we go.
Why don't you just go through,
through
page by page? Any questions on page 70, for example?
Okay. Thank you for guidance on that, Councillor.
does it say the same thing?
I've got none, nor on 71.
Financials. You've got the graphs on. We feel comfortable with those KPI
Chair,
graphs.
page 74.
Yeah, page 74. Two
the-
sets of numbers.
Sorry, I was on 73.
Oh, you're on 73?
Oh, just as a general thing, the last thing, this includes capital work on design, construction, Hiratonga floodplain scheme uplift and renewal program. Could someone describe that, send out a note describing what that actually is, without telling me necessarily now?
Well, like I can tell you straight away, the uplift is the increase in level of service from 1 in 100 to 1 in 500 year.
That's what I was thinking of.
Correct,
So can you
yes.
can you expand away how that's going to project forward in the future in terms of work plan, cost, etc., timing?
So the capital for this has been smoothed on a, I think from memory, 1.5 million, 1.2.
About just over $1 million
Just
a year over 3 years.
Yep. And
I
that,
think it would be fair to say that we probably didn't have the profile for that cash flow correct in the last LTP, and we've actually got to do a lot of work to define in more detail what the project is. So that's one of our first tasks once we fully resource the project. It is a significant undertaking, and at the moment the scope is really at the level of improving the level of service, but there's multiple ways we can do that. Some of those ways may require a whole lot of planning transactions, as an example, and until we actually look at the full system and lock in a detailed scope, we really don't want to start construction.
I get that. Could I just simply ask that a brief paper come back to a future council meeting outlining what you see as the work program? So
Yes.
you'll do the scope, what the options are, what the likely estimated costs are, what the estimated timelines are, and so we can just get a feel for how this is going to go, feel for this as councillors.
Yep.
And I know it will be an iterative document, will change over time, but it's a significant project, and I don't think any of us have got a head around it quite yet, because we don't know quite what it is, but we
No,
at least want to
that's
know
right.
what we don't know.
That's right. Look, it was a placeholder in the LTP. We haven't had the staff to do the work, so effectively the money just hasn't been being spent, and that's one of the key drivers of our CapEx being way down on forecast. The good thing about that, I guess, is we're not paying finance costs, interest costs on those on that borrowing at this point in time, and that's helping offset some of the reduced revenue that we've got from our investment funds not yielding quite yet the 4.5% that we budgeted.
Yeah, that's that financing, but I'm more worried about going to 1 in 500.
That'll come to the Environment Services Committee in due course once the project's been scoped up. You got a
So
rough
one of our
timeline?
challenges at the moment is resourcing that project. So we have a project manager starting in July, or the manager of our new project delivery area starting in July. We're also currently recruiting for a project manager and a design engineer who would help deliver that project. At the moment, the project's simply unresourced.
I understand that, but I just want a paper to describe all of that.
Yes.
So we can do a simple paper
Except-
at the next DNS.
I think
the next
we're looking
one.
at probably the end of this calendar year for bringing that project forward with some material shape to it. And in this afternoon's discussion on the annual plan, we will be highlighting some additional resourcing we're proposing for the engineering area to support this work.
So could I just ask that the next Environmental Services report gets a paper that just describes that and tells us when we can expect the next thing?
Yep, I think we can do that.
Simple paper.
Maybe.
Mr Chairman,
Subject to the chair's
Some of
approval.
the chairs.
Councillor Dean.
Mr Chairman, just going back to reflecting on the nature of this report and the activity report. The thing is that this organisational performance report is largely looking backwards whereas the activity report looks forward. So you've got to be very careful about mixing up past and future tense. You agree?
Well, the activity report is a bit of a mixture of both past and it's generally comes across as kind of present tense, which is kind of what we're currently working on. Understand that, and because this was a 7-month report as opposed to a quarterly report, this is more there's more backcasting today in this report than you would expect to see in the future iterations. So this takes us really back to the start of the financial year.
Oh, we'll see how it develops.
Yep. Okay. Look, we're still on the financial information part of the report. I think we're at page 73 or 7. Choose present. Councillor Bailey, do you have something in that area?
Page 75, Chair.
75.
The consents and compliance.
So the bottom.
The bottom graph.
Yep.
I'd like some clarification about why it is a concern that compliance is spending more time in non-chargeable pollution response than in chargeable compliance, because I thought they were two separate functions. So why is there a concern that one is costing more than the other?
Look, it's only from a budget point of view. So that's a financial commentary. It's not a commentary on the nature of the work they're doing. It's simply that assumptions are made at the start of the financial year in terms of budgeting about the relative balance of work, and because a significant proportion of their funding is cost recovered, the more they're doing beyond what had been forecast in non-cost recoverable work, the greater the deficit that grows, at least in essence, in that funding area. So it's a financial commentary.
Sorry, Chair, through you again. So with compliance, pollution responses, they're difficult to budget for because they are events that happen beyond our control. They're not something that we've got control over when they happen.
That's right.
So what surprises me is that the budgets is now somehow tied together, because the functions are entirely different. So I thought we would have had a budget for non-chargeable, pollution response, and a budget for compliance and regulation.
Yep.
So why is there so again it's this word that is a concern that worries me.
It's a good question. Part of the reason for that is within the team itself there's some fungibility, if you like, in terms of the individuals and what the work they do. So if you think about it, if there's a big surge in pollution activity, we don't have people sitting around waiting for those events to happen, and so we'll redirect resources that are otherwise going to be doing consent monitoring, for which we can charge, and they will have to come across and respond to a pollution incident, because pollution incidents must be responded to. So the financial model is set up to do that, and there's overs and unders historically, and it's been managed. And I guess we're just flagging at this stage of the financial year, this is creating a little bit of financial pressure as a consequence of doing that. It requires us, therefore, on an annual basis to just revisit how we're thinking about that overall mix. It would be nice if we could just keep them completely separate, but in terms of the utilisation of staff, it does make sense to borrow across from the two lines.
Can I just suggest that it was the use of the word concern that worries me?
Yep.
Because that implies to me that there's somehow one's more important than the other, and it's just, I suppose it's just a language thing.
That's fine. Yes.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Councillor Hewitt.
So I'm back on page 74. We jumped to page. James, my question for you: when we are $260,000 over budget with the port consultation, and you've given us a heads up on that before, but where is that additional funding going to come from, and are you able to share where the load's going to be lightened in terms of HPRIC at this point?
Look, I think the first thing to say is that I think in setting a budget of $100,000 for the port consultation, we underestimated the extent to which deep and broad engagement with the community was going to be required. So we made some decisions through that process, particularly in relation to feedback from the community about their desire for information and the volume of it. And then there was also a whole bunch of legal things that were thrown up that weren't anticipated, that required a fair amount of managing on the way through, legoimas, threats of legal action, etc., etc. So that whole project was under spec, and I think we to some extent need to reflect, certainly for future consultations, of anything approaching that degree of controversy about resourcing it adequately. The overspend will be dealt with in terms of the overall bottom line, so they'll drop to the bottom line for the financial year, and there will be some areas of underspend that will hopefully offset some of that, but ultimately the costs from this project will be borne by proceeds from the transaction in the event that it proceeds. In the event that the port transaction doesn't proceed, then we've got a much bigger set of financial challenges that we're going to have to rebalance. So that's kind of where that sits. In relation to HBRIC's costs, there are the bulk of the costs being incurred within HBRIC right now all relate to the port project. So again, will be funded as part of that transaction on the assumption that it does proceed. There is a enduring question, obviously, about HBRIC's utility and the cost benefit of retaining it. That's something we're going to provide council with some advice in the coming months and as we go through the port process.
Committee, we've got quite a long way to go through here. I don't think it'll be as onerous as it sounds, but if we could just finish off the financial section here. Are there any other issues that you want to raise in regard to finance that are there? And I would comment, we've got clearly we're operating, as the statement says, operating close to budget. The capital is behind. There are some issues to do with the returns on investments, and we probably need to have a commentary on that, but I wonder whether that waits, Jess, until our reforecast session in April.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Apart from those observations on that, are there any other issues before we break? Which time are we working through? Which is the 10:30 now? So we could break now for a quick break and then back to the balance of the paper. Are you comfortable with that?
That's a very good suggestion, providing strong leadership here. Great.
Looking for your guidance on that, Councillor. Any other issues on the money side? Otherwise, we'll rule that off and come back and deal with the rest so the team can have a. Thank you.
Marvellous.